Violet put her hand on Klaus's shoulder and gave it a little squeeze of comfort. Without another word, the three Baudelaires headed back down the hallway and into the dining room. Aunt Josephine had set the table for four, providing a large cushion for Sonny and another pile of tin cans in the corner of the room, just in case burglars tried to steal their dinner. Normally, of course, Aunt Josephine said, soup's on is an idiomatic expression that has nothing to do with soup. It simply means that dinner is ready. In this case, however, I've actually made soup. Oh, good, Violet said. There's nothing like hot soup on a chilly evening. Actually, it's not hot soup, Aunt Josephine said. I never cook anything hot because I'm afraid of turning the stove on. It might burst into flames. I've made chilled cucumber soup for dinner. The Baudelaires looked at one another and tried to hide their dismay. As you probably know, chilled cucumber soup is a delicacy that is best enjoyed on a very hot day. I myself enjoyed it once in Egypt while visiting a friend of mine who works as a snake charmer. When it is well prepared, the chilled cucumber soup has a delicious minty taste, cool and refreshing as if you were drinking something as well as eating it. But on a cold day, in a drafty room, chilled cucumber soup is about as welcome as a swarm of wasps at a bat mitzvah. In dead silence, the three children sat down at the table with their Aunt Josephine and did their best to force down the cold, slimy concoction. The only sound was of Sonny's foreteeth chattering on her soup spoon as she ate her frigid dinner. As I'm sure you know, when no one is speaking at the dinner table, the meal seems to take hours, so it felt like much, much later when Aunt Josephine finally broke the silence. My dear husband and I never had children, she said, because we were afraid to. But I do want you to know that I'm very happy that you're here. I'm often very lonely up on this hill by myself, and when Mr. Poe wrote to me about your troubles, I didn't want to be as lonely as I was I didn't want you to be as lonely as I was when I lost my dear Ike. Was Ike your husband? Violet asked. Aunt Josephine smiled, but she didn't look at Violet. It was as if she were talking more to herself than the Baudelaires. Yes, she said, in a faraway voice. He was my husband, but he was much more than that. He was my best friend, my partner in grammar, and the only person I knew who could whistle with crackers in his mouth. Our mother could do that, Klaus said, smiling. Her specialty was Mozart's 14th Symphony. Ike's was Beethoven's Fourth Quartet, Aunt Josephine replied. Apparently it's a family characteristic. I'm sorry we never got to meet him, Violet said. He sounds wonderful. He was wonderful, Aunt Josephine said, stirring her soup and blowing on it even though it was ice cold. I was so sad when he died. I felt like I'd lost the two most special things in my life. Two? Violet asked. What do you mean? I lost Ike, Aunt Josephine said, and I lost Lake Lachrymose. I mean, I didn't really lose it, of course, but it's still down in the valley. But I grew up on its shores. I used to swim in it every day. I knew which beaches were sandy, and I knew which were rocky. I knew all the islands in the middle of its waters, and all the caves along the side of its shores. Lake Lachrymose felt like a friend to me, but when it took poor Ike away from me, I was too afraid to go near it anymore. I stopped swimming in it. I never went to the beach again. I even put away all my books about it. The only way I can bear to look at it is from the wide window in the library. Library? Klaus asked, brightening. You have a library? Of course, Aunt Josephine said. Where else could I keep all of my books on grammar? If you've all finished with your soup, I'll show you the library. I couldn't eat another bite, Violet said truthfully. Sonny shrieked in agreement. No, no, Sonny, Aunt Josephine said. Is not grammatically correct. You mean to say, I have also finished my supper. Sonny insisted. My goodness, you do need grammar lessons. All the more reason to go to the library. Come on, children, said Aunt Josephine. Leaving behind their half-full soup bowls, the Baudelaires followed Aunt Josephine down the hallway, taking care not to touch any of the doorknobs they passed. At the end of the hall, Aunt Josephine stopped and opened an ordinary-looking door, but when the children stepped through the door, they arrived in a room that was anything but ordinary. The library was neither square nor rectangular, like most rooms, but curved in the shape of an oval. One wall of the oval was devoted to books, rows and rows and rows of them, and every single one of them was about grammar. There was an encyclopedia of nouns placed in a series of simple wooden bookshelves, curved to fit the wall. There were very thick books on the history of verbs, lined up in metal bookshelves that were polished to a bright shine. And there were cabinets made of glass, with adjective manuals placed inside them, as if they were for sale in a store instead of in somebody's house. In the middle of the room, there were some comfortable-looking chairs, each with its own footstool, so one could stretch out one's legs while reading. But it was the other wall of the oval, at the far end of the room, that drew the children's attention. From floor to ceiling, the wall was a window, just one enormous curved pane of glass. Beyond the glass was a spectacular view of Lake Lachrymose. When the children stepped forward to take a closer look, they felt as if they were flying high above the dark lake instead of merely looking on it. This is the only way I can stand to look at the lake, Aunt Josephine said in a quiet voice. From far away, if I get much closer, I remember my last picnic on the beach with my darling Ike. I warned him to wait an hour after eating before he went into the lake, but he's only waited 45 minutes. He thought that was enough. Did he get cramps? Klaus asked. That's what's supposed to happen if you don't wait an hour before you swim. That's one reason, Aunt Josephine said, but in Lake Lachrymose there's another one. If you don't wait an hour after eating, the Lake Lachrymose leeches will smell food on you and attack. Leeches? Violet asked. Leeches, Klaus explained, are a bit like worms. They are blind and live in bodies of water, and in order to feed, they attach themselves to you and suck your blood. Violet shuddered. How horrible. Swow, Sunny shrieked, which probably meant something along the lines of, why in the world would you go swimming in a lake full of leeches? The lachrymose leeches, Aunt Josephine said, are quite different from regular leeches. They each have 6 rows of very sharp teeth, and one very sharp nose. They can smell even the smallest bit of food from far, far away. The lachrymose leeches are usually quite harmless, preying only on small fish. But if they smell food on a human, they will swarm around him and tears came to Aunt Josephine's eyes. She took out a pale pink handkerchief and dabbed them away. I apologize, children. It is not grammatically correct to end a sentence with the word and, but I get so upset when I think about Ike that I cannot talk about his death. We're sorry we brought it up, Klaus said quickly. We didn't mean to upset you. That's all right, Aunt Josephine said, blowing her nose. It's just that I prefer to think of Ike in other ways. Ike always loved the sunshine, and I like to imagine that wherever he is now, it's as sunny as can be. Of course, nobody knows what happens after you die, but it's nice to think of my husband someplace very, very hot, don't you think? Yes, I do, Violet said. It is very nice. She swallowed. She wanted to say something else to Aunt Josephine, but when you only have known someone for a few hours, it is difficult to know what they would like to hear. Aunt Josephine, she said timidly, have you thought of moving someplace else? Perhaps if you lived somewhere far away from Lake Lachrymose, you might feel better. We could go with you, Klaus piped up. Oh, I could never sell this house, Aunt Josephine said. I'm afraid of realtors. The 3 Baudelaire youngsters looked at one another surreptitiously, a word which here means while Aunt Josephine wasn't looking. None of them had ever heard of a person who was frightened of realtors. There are 2 kinds of fears, rational and irrational. Or, in simpler terms, fears that make sense and fears that don't. For instance, the Baudelaire orphans have a fear of Count Olaf, which makes perfect sense because he is an evil man who wants to destroy them. But if they were afraid of lemon meringue pie, this would be an irrational fear, because lemon meringue pie is delicious and has never hurt a soul. Being afraid of a monster under the bed is perfectly rational, because there may in fact be a monster under your bed at any time, ready to eat you all up. But a fear of realtors is an irrational fear. Realtors, as I'm sure you know, are people who assist in the buying and selling of houses. Besides occasionally wearing an ugly yellow coat, the worst a realtor can do to you is show you a house that you find is ugly. And so it is completely irrational to be terrified of them. As Violet, Klaus, and Sunny looked down at the dark lake and thought about their new lives with Aunt Josephine, they experienced a fear themselves, and even a worldwide expert on fear would have difficulty saying whether this was a rational fear or an irrational fear. The Baudelaire's fear was that misfortune would soon befall them. On one hand, this was an irrational fear because Aunt Josephine seemed like a good person, and Count Olaf was nowhere to be seen. But on the other hand, the Baudelaires had experienced so many terrible things that it seemed rational to think that another catastrophe was just around the corner.